We have a crisis in the world, tremendous crisis, and also crisis in our consciousness, in us. I see the urgency of change, radical revolution, mutation in the mind. I see it. It is necessary. There is complete quietness of the mind, and that which is silent has vast space. Only then that which is nameless comes into being.
This is Urgency of Change, the Krishnamurti podcast. We must inquire into the question of emptiness. It is an amazingly important question, because if there is no emptiness, no new thing can be. Hello and welcome to episode 227 of Urgency of Change. Each episode of the Krishnamurti podcast features carefully selected clips from the archives. Their aim is to represent different aspects of Krishnamurti's radical approach to many of the issues and questions we all face in our lives. This week's theme is emptiness. Upcoming themes are questioning, disorder, and progress. This is a podcast from Krishnamurti Foundation Trust. Please visit the official YouTube channel for hundreds of full-length video and audio recordings of Krishnamurti's talks and discussions. In addition, the Foundation's own channel features a large collection of specially selected clips. You can also find our regular quotes and videos on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Krishnamurti Foundation Trust. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave a review or rating on your podcast app, which helps our visibility. This week's episode on emptiness has 5 sections. This first extract is from Krishnamurti's third talk in Paris, 1965, and is titled The Two Types of Emptiness.
Why is there this insistence on desire being fulfilled? Now, if you want a coat, you get a coat, a suit, a shirt, a tie, a shoe, whatever one wants. But the persistent drive, surely behind it, there is the sense of complete emptiness, loneliness. Because I can't live by myself alone, in myself. I see insufficient. I'm insufficient. You know more than I do. You're more beautiful, more intellectual, more clever, more this and more that, famous. I want to be all that and more. Why? I do not know if you have ever asked yourself that question. If you have, and if you have asked it not as a clever theoretical question, then you will find the answer. And you can only find the answer when your mind is not projecting an answer. You're following? Am I making myself clear? I want to know why I want so many things, or one thing. Why? To be happy, to find God, to be rich, to be, this. To be famous, to be complete, to be liberated, whatever that may mean, all the things that one builds up. To have a perfect, happy marriage, perfect relationship, good God. First of all, it indicates, doesn't it, how shallow the mind is. And also, doesn't it indicate of our own sense of loneliness, emptiness. Now, there are two kinds of emptiness. The mind looking at itself and saying, I'm empty, and real emptiness. I want to fill that emptiness because I don't like that emptiness, that loneliness, that isolation, that sense of being completely cut off from everything. One must have had that feeling, either superficially, casually, or very intensely. Then, feeling that, either one escapes from it, obviously, or another form of escape is to try to cover it up, fill it up, by knowledge, by relationship, the demand for perfect relationship between a man and a woman, between, all the rest of it. This is actually what takes place, doesn't it? I am not inventing it. If you have observed yourself, gone into yourself little bit, not tremendously, that comes much later. If one observes this, one knows this. So one begins to find out that where there is this sense of inexhaustible loneliness, emptiness created by the mind, looking at itself as being empty, then there is this tremendous urge, drive, pursuit to fulfill, to get something, to cover it up. So there it is. Consciously or unconsciously, one is aware of this state of, I don't like to use the word emptiness, because emptiness is a beautiful word. A thing that is completely empty, then only it is useful for anything. Like an empty cup, like an empty room. But if the cup is full and the room is full of furniture, then it is worthless. But we, being empty, fill ourselves with all kinds of noise, pleasure, and every form of escapism. So that is and why are we empty? You following? Emptiness, the urge to fill that emptiness, desire, pleasure, and the continuity of that pleasure, which creates false values, and hence conflict in all relationships. I want pleasure in my relationship with my wife and husband. And when that wife and husband looks another, I'm jealous. I hate. I take pleasure in my nationality, the country, the position I have in that country, the country with which I have identified myself. And when that country so-called defends itself, which is to attack another, there is no defense and attack, they're all the same. Then begins the butchery. So we are caught in this thing. So we know this emptiness, the escape from this emptiness, the desire, pleasure, and all the rest of it. Then why is there emptiness? I hope you're non-verbally pursuing it. Why is there this emptiness? Is it inevitable? Or is the mind creating it? When we use the word emptiness, it is comparative. That is, I see you rich, not physically. Nowadays that's nothing at all. Any man who works a little bit hard can get, and clever and cunning, he can get fairly well off. But you're rich in other ways. You have knowledge. You know what it means to feel, to live richly, inwardly. And I have nothing. I'm stupid, ugly. So, the comparison is the beginning of this emptiness. I know, we say, if there is no comparison, there will be no progress. Progress in what? All technological progress is not the result of one man. It's a whole group. The splitting of the atom and all the rest of it, the putting of the car, it's not one man that has made it. There are a whole group of people have made it. But we, as an individual, we say, I want to be. So I compare. You are, I am not. And I want to be. So one begins to see that comparison invariably breeds emptiness. And this is one of the most intricate and subtle things to understand. Because we are brought up with it. In schools, from childhood, we compare. You are beautiful, I am not. You get more and I get less marks. And so we're conditioned that way from childhood. So the mind comparing itself with another is the beginning of this emptiness. Please look at it. Don't push it aside. It's so simple. And must we compare? Must I compare myself with you who are so this and that? And is there progress, evolution through comparison? Inwardly? Obviously not. If I compare my painting with your painting, I've ceased to be a painter. If I love and compare my love to your love, it's not love. But this is what's happening all the time. So to live without comparison, you understand, that's one of the most subtle things and the most marvelous thing if you could. Then you will find The mind is no longer creating the emptiness. The mind then is not comparing itself with another and thereby making itself small or great. And one can live that way, without any sense of comparison with anybody, God Himself included. Then you begin to understand this whole process of a mind looking at itself through comparison and therefore reducing itself to something great or small. And being small, it wants to become great, and being great, it wants to be greater. And hence it breeds within itself that sense of insufficiency, that sense of emptiness, loneliness. And hence all the misery and the travail begins.
The second extract is from the 6th talk in Saanen, 1968, and is titled, What Are We to Do with Emptiness?
Truth is not an intellectual phenomenon, nor an emotional, sentimental affair. And we have to find the truth of pleasure, the truth of beauty, and the reality of what love is. You see, most of us, fairly intelligent, if we are, have seen all this. Seen the torture of love, the dependence on it, the fear of it, the loneliness of not being loved, and seeking it everlastingly in all kinds of relationships, never finding it to our complete satisfaction. So is love satisfaction? Is love a torture, hedged about by jealousy, envy, hatred, anger, dependence? And when there is no beauty in our heart, we go to museums, concerts, visit ancient temples and marvel at the beauty of a column, at the Greek temple with its lovely pillars, proportions, against the blue sky. And we talk endlessly about beauty. Or you go to a concert and are involved in it. And when you lose touch with nature altogether, as modern man is losing, because he's living more and more in towns, and there are societies formed, or groups, to go into the country, to look at birds, trees, rivers, as though by coming together to look at trees and form societies, groups, you're going to touch nature, come into extraordinary contact with that immense beauty. Because we have lost it. Modern objective painting, museums, concerts, everything becomes important. So there is an emptiness which is always seeking self-expression and deriving pleasure, and hence the very demand for pleasure breeds the fear of it, not having it completely, resisting aggression, all the rest of it. And this sense of inward void. And to fill that inward void, this emptiness, this sense of utter isolation, loneliness, which I'm sure you all felt it, will proceed to fill it with books, with knowledge, with relationships, with every form of trickery. But at the end of it, there's still this unfillable emptiness. Then we turn to God. Of course, that's the last, ultimate resort of the thoughtless. So, when there is this emptiness, is love possible? And when there is this sense of deep, unfathomable void, is beauty possible? And if one is aware of this emptiness and not escape from it, either through fulfillment and with its own expressions, pleasure and so on, then what is one to do with this emptiness? You understand me? We have tried to fill it with gods, with knowledge, with experience, with music, with pictures, with extraordinary technological information, going to the moon and doing, that's what we had occupied, morning till night, to fill that. And if you are at all self-critically aware, one realizes that it cannot be filled by any person. And see the importance of it. If you fill it with another person, which is called relationship, with an image, then out of that comes fear of losing it. And so dependence. And so aggressive possession, jealousy, and all the rest of it follows. So one asks oneself, can it ever be filled by anything? By social activity, good works, going to the monastery and meditating God knows about what, training oneself to be aware, which is again such an absurdity. So if one cannot fill it, then what is one to do? Do you understand the importance of this question? We have filled it with what we call pleasure. We have filled it through self-expression. We have filled it searching truth, God. And one realizes nothing can fill it. Nothing. Neither your own image, nor the image that you have created about the world, or an ideology of nothing. And so, beauty, love, and pleasure we have used to cover this emptiness. And if you no longer escape but are with it, then what you are going to do? What is one to do? Is the question clear? Have we followed it somewhat? What is this loneliness? This sense of inward, deep void. What is it? How does it come into being? Does it exist? Please follow it. Does it exist because you are trying to fill it? You are trying to escape from it. Does it exist because you are afraid of it? Or is it an idea? And therefore the mind is never in contact with it. I don't know if you're following all this. Is never directly in relationship to it. You understand what? All right. I see you're not meeting my point. I discover for myself this emptiness in myself. I'm aware of it. And I've ceased to escape, which is obviously an immature activity. There it is. And nothing can fill it. Now I ask myself, how has it come into being? Has whole of my living, daily activity, daily assumptions and so on, daily activity, has that produced it? It may have. That is, the self, the me, the ego, whatever word you may use, is in all its activity isolating itself. The very nature of the me, the self, the ego, is isolation. It is separative. Right? And those activities have produced this isolated state. The state of deep emptiness in myself. So it is a result consequence, not inherent in itself. I don't know if you're following this. Bene, we understand this? So I see, as long as my activity is self-centered and self-expressive, there must be this void. And to fill that void, I do all kinds of stuff, which again is self-centered. So it again becomes a wider and deeper emptiness. So my problem then is being aware of this void, emptiness, loneliness, isolation. Is it possible to go beyond it? Not to escape from it. Not to say I will not be self-centered. When you say I will not be self-centered, you're already self-centered. I don't know if you follow this. When you exercise will to deny the activity of the self, that very will is the factor of isolation. So, the mind has been educated through centuries upon centuries in its demand for security, safety, has built not only physiologically but psychologically this self-centered activity. And this activity in daily life, the family, my job, my possessions, and all that, is producing this emptiness, this isolation. Then the question is, how is that activity to end? Can it ever end? Or one must entirely ignore that activity and bring another quality to it altogether. Wonderful point. Look, I see this emptiness. I see how it has come into being. One is aware that will or any other activity to dispel the creator of this emptiness is only another form of self-centered activity. I see that very clearly, objectively. And I realize suddenly I can't do anything about it. You understand? Before I did something about it. I escaped, I tried to fill it, I tried to understand it, I tried to go into it, which are all another form of isolation. So I suddenly realized Joe, I can't do anything. The more I try to do something about it, the more I'm building walls of isolation. Please follow this. I realize the mind cannot do anything about it. The mind itself realizes. Thought itself realizes that it cannot touch it. Because the moment thought touches it, it breathes again its own emptiness. So by carefully observing, objectively, I see this whole process. And the very seeing of it is enough. See what has happened. Before, I have used energy to fulfill this emptiness. Wandered all over the place. And I see the absurdity of it. The mind sees it very clearly, how absurd it is to do all that kind of stuff. So, I'm not dissipating energy. And in looking further, self-centered activity has brought about this sense of emptiness. And looking still further, no action on the part of the mind or thought can ever dissipate this emptiness. So, thought becomes quiet. So the mind becomes completely still. Because it has seen the whole map of this. And so there is silence. And one is in that silence, there is no loneliness. And it is only when there is that silence, complete silence of the mind, there is beauty and love. Which may or may not express.
The third extract is from Krishnamurti's third talk in Saanen 1975 and is titled Total Perception of Emptiness.
So I must inquire why human beings are so dreadfully attached to another. As that is one of the major causes of suffering, and to understand and to be totally free of suffering without becoming callous, one must go into this problem of attachment. You understand, sir? Are we traveling together? You're attached, aren't you? To your knowledge, to your status, to your capacity, to your efficiency, to your knowledge, to a person, to a belief, to a conclusion, to your country, to your God, you're tremendously attached. one of the causes of this attachment is the movement of thought, which is seeking security, because thought itself is insecure. Therefore, it seeks security in a person, in an idea, in a conclusion. This is also obvious. No? Or you cling to an ideal or to a projection which you call God. Why are human beings, why is one so deeply attached? Is it a matter of conditioning, or is it a psychological emptiness? And out of that emptiness, and the fear of that emptiness, one clings to another, or to a belief, and so on, so on. So you understand? Either it is a matter of environmental conditioning, or is it that inwardly one feels lost, uncertain, empty, lonely? Therefore one clings to these things. I also looked up the word emptiness. It means leisure. Part one of this means leisure, to have leisure. If you have no leisure, you cannot learn. Right? School, the word school means leisure, in which that leisure is going to help you to learn. You follow? A school that has no leisure offers to the student a mechanical movement, repetitive movement, which is what's happening now. Our education is mechanical, and it has no leisure. I don't know if you see this. And is this emptiness that makes man cling to something. And in that attachment, and in that adherence to something, is called love. So as one must have leisure to learn about this emptiness, and to understand the whole movement of thought as attachment, one must have freedom to look. I wonder if you meet all this. Are you bored, sirs? One must have freedom to observe this emptiness. Not as the observer and the observed, because when you are observing, there is no observer. There is only observation. No, a moment, sir, let me finish. So I can't throw any light on anything. You have to throw light yourself and find out. There is an observation of this emptiness and if there is an observer who is observing the emptiness, then that observer is the conditioned entity who is observing. That observer is the past, with all its memories, with all its remembrances, its hurts, its prejudices, and with all that background, he is observing that emptiness. Therefore, it is distorted observation. So to observe without the observer, one must inquire into the structure and the nature of the observer. Right? Is this all getting too complicated? It isn't one of those puzzles you put one box into another. Gets more. So, the observer is the past. The observer is the conditioned entity, conditioned by environment, conditioned by the culture in which he has been brought up, with his prejudices, with its knowledge which is always the past. That observer sees this emptiness. And therefore, he is looking at it from a very limited, conditioned point of view. He is incapable of looking at it totally. You understand? If I am prejudiced, as a Hindu or a Christian or a Catholic or a communist, it is a prejudice. If I say I'm a communist, it is a prejudice. If I look with my prejudice, the prejudice is fragmentary, is limited, and therefore I look at something in a limited, small, petty way. And if there is no observer, then there is a total perception of this emptiness. I wonder. So, when there is no observer, but only observation, which reveals the totality of that emptiness, then there is no movement of thought as attachment. I wonder if you see this. Do you see this, some of you? Not what I say, but actually, that is with care. Observe your emptiness and see that the observer is interfering, is cutting across your observation, and therefore distorting it, limiting it, conditioning your perception. If you see that, then you see the totality of this emptiness, and then what takes place? One of the factors of uncertainty and insecurity lies in becoming something. Right? I am becoming something, professionally or ideologically or psychologically. In that becoming something, there is great uncertainty. Whereas in not becoming, which is to remain totally with that emptiness, is to be nothing, and therefore complete security.
The fourth extract is from the fourth talk in Bombay, 1966, and is titled Emptiness and Space.
To listen to all these talks, if you are listening at all, the very act of listening is an act of discipline, which discipline is not enforced, a discipline which is not imitative, which does not conform to a pattern through fear. You have listened because you are interested, and that very interest creates its own discipline. Therefore, the energy that has gone into disciplining by suppressing conformity and all the rest of it is now energy which is highly disciplined, not through the desire of pleasure, of experience and all that. It is highly capable. All this, the previous talks and this talk, is an unrollment, an unfolding of the whole process of thinking, of the whole process of consciousness. Now, if you have gone that far, not verbal but actually, then you can begin to inquire into the question of space and emptiness. Because there must be space. Otherwise, there is no freedom. A little mind has no space. A little respectable, bourgeois, very carefully educated mind, with all its problems and anxieties and fears and despairs, such a mind has no space within itself. So one has to go into the question of what is space. What is space? Space is created by the object. Please listen, find out. There is this microphone, the object, and because of the object, there is space round it. And because of the object exists because of the space. There is the house, a house. In the house there is a room. The room, because of the four walls, creates space within the four walls. And there's a space outside the house. There is space because there is a center within us. There is a center. The center that is the observer, the sensor, the seeker, the entity that says, I must not. The entity that says, I have been, I am, but I will be. The center. That center, round it creates space. Otherwise the center couldn't exist. Now, is there space without center? And you can only answer that non-verbally, non-argumentatively, not as opinion or this or that. You can only answer it if the center is not. And if the center is, and that center creates space, in that space there is no freedom, whatever. You'll always be a slave. So, freedom demands that you find out for yourself what space is. Whether the center, the object is creating the space round itself, and because it exists, it can only exist in space round itself, and therefore it's not space at all. Therefore, as long as there is a center in which there is thought, the observer, the seeker, there is no freedom. And freedom can only exist when there is complete space, not space within the boundaries of the mind. And also, one must inquire into this question of emptiness. Because it is an amazingly important question. Because if there is no emptiness, no new thing can be. If there is only a continuity, which is time, then whatever activity that or action that is involved in that continuity cannot bring about something new. What it can do is bring about a modified continuity. We haven't time to go into this. So, because it's only a mind that has understood space, that knows what that is, that is aware of this emptiness. It is only such a mind that can be completely still. Because stillness, silence, is not a product of thought. Silence is outside the field of consciousness. You can't say, I have experienced a state of silence. If you have experienced it, it is not silence. Or if you say, I want to find out what silence is, I'll practice silence by not saying a word, this or that, that's not silence. But if you have understood conflict, duality, time, this whole question of discipline, order, then you will have inquired, discovered for yourself what space is and what emptiness is. Because really, you cannot discover it. It comes upon you. It is there. You can't experience silence any more than you can experience space and emptiness. But this is absolutely essential. Because then only energy is completely free, uncontaminated, without any direction brought about through pleasure. Now if you have reached, if the mind has gone that far, which is all part of meditation, then there is a fact which cannot be expressed through words. Because words always have a definite meaning. Every word is loaded. Take the word love, how loaded it is, how heavy it is. Or the word beauty. But the word love and the word beauty are not are not the fact. The fact of love is not the word. But to live in that quality of love and beauty, there must be this space, this emptiness, and this silence. And from this silence, there is action. Not having learnt, act. Because then every action is non-productive of conflict. So then, life, living in this world every day, going to the office, doing everything, into it there comes a joy. There is a bliss which is not pleasure, an ecstasy which is not the product of time. And without that, do what you will, social order and disorder, wars, conflicts, will not bring about a happy human being. What brings about bliss is this total awareness of this extraordinary, total awareness of this intense silence. And from that silence action, then you will know what bliss is.
The final extract in this episode is from Krishnamurti's 6th talk in New Delhi 1964 and is titled In Emptiness is Energy and Creation.
So a mind that is attentive is in a state of non-contradiction and therefore in a state of no effort at all. And that is absolutely necessary. Otherwise you cannot possibly empty. If that is not possible, the mind cannot be emptied. And you will see why it is necessary. Most minds are noisy. They're everlastingly chattering. They're everlastingly soliloquizing or repeating or what it will do, what it has done, what it must do. It's never quiet. And we think to produce this quietness in the mind, you must do some kind of method, practice, which is again becomes mechanical. But if you are aware of every thought as it arises, not judge it, not condemn it, not accept it, but just be attentive, then you will see that the mind becomes extraordinarily quiet. You haven't disciplined it to be quiet, which is a deadly thing. Because if you discipline the mind, the mind becomes shallow, empty, dead. The mind must be free, alive, full, vital. But if you are attentive, out of that attention there comes its own unsolicited, non-repressive discipline. Because only the mind that is very disciplined through attention, not through compulsion and conformity. It's only such a mind is clear. Then the mind which is attentive, which has learned through attention about itself, its conscious and unconscious motives, fancies, illusions, fears, ambitions, greed, jealousy, competition, and all the rest of the things which we are, when the mind has, through awareness, has learnt about itself, then the mind becomes quiet, not disciplined, not drugged, not mesmerizing itself. Such a quiet mind is a still mind. It must be still. Because otherwise it's not empty. Because the mind of all of us, of most people, is the result of 2 million years and of time. It is conditioned. It is shaped. It is under the compulsion of many impressions, under great strain, conscious as well as unconscious. driven by circumstances. So, such a mind, if it is not completely still, not demanding, not seeking, if it is not still, it is not empty. You know, anything new can only take place in emptiness. A new child is conceived in the womb of emptiness. So, when the mind is empty, not made empty by refraining thought, controlling thought, suppressing thought, that is not emptiness. That's merely another form of escape from reality. And the reality is yourself, actually what you are. Not the super Atman, which are all inventions of your grandmothers and fathers, and Shankaras and Buddhas. All that must go for the mind to be completely empty and still. Then, in that emptiness, there is a movement which is creation. In that emptiness, there is the energy which the mind needs to go to the ultimate. And this whole process, from the beginning of denial to the very end, which is not escape from life, but the very understanding of that life, is meditation. And then you will find that you are meditating all day long. Not just 1 minute of the day. You're meditating where you are. Wherever you are, in your office, in the bus. Then you are directly in contact with life. You are meditating while you are talking because you are aware. You are attentive what you are saying, how you are saying it, how you talk to if you have a servant, how you talk to you are aware, you are attentive. Therefore the mind, which is limited, narrow, petty, shackled by time, breaks through. And it is only such a mind that can find the everlasting. And that is the beauty of meditation.